My name is William, and on Father's Day, I received a gift that almost destroyed me. At first, it looked like a thoughtful box from my daughter. But when my wife whispered, "Don't open it, can't you see?" I froze. Tiny breathing holes lined the cardboard, and moments later, the police were at my door. I had spent 43 years working myself to the bone for my family, only to discover that the very child I sacrificed for could turn against me in such a chilling way. The box wasn't just a gift, it was a weapon, a message of betrayal that forced me to choose between being a victim or reclaiming my dignity. Before we begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like mine. The first hint that this Father's Day would be unlike any other came not from the gift itself, but from the look on Jessica's face. She had always been cautious, quick to spot dangers I overlooked. But when her eyes locked on that box resting on our coffee table, I felt something cold tighten in my chest. "William," she whispered, her voice thin as paper, "don't open it." I frowned, half amused, half puzzled. It was a gift from our daughter, wasn't it? A kind gesture on a day meant for celebration. But as I leaned closer, I noticed what my wife had already seen, tiny punctures running along the cardboard edges. They were too precise, too deliberate, like someone had carefully prepared this box for something alive. A faint rustling inside made my skin prickle. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a gift at all. It was a message. My mind raced back to just a week before when Samantha had stood in our living room, her voice sharp as shattered glass. "Dad, I need the money now, not when you're gone." I can still hear the coffee cup slipping from her trembling hands, exploding against the hardwood. I had held those inheritance documents tight against my chest, symbols of decades of sacrifice. And there she was, demanding it all, as if I were just a bank teller, withholding her withdrawal. Peter had leaned back smugly on the sofa, encouraging her like a snake charmer coaxing a cobra closer. "What's a few thousand?" he'd said with a smirk. To them, I was no longer father or father-in-law. I was a wallet with a pulse. When Jessica urged everyone to calm down, Samantha turned on her like a storm, spitting accusations about greed and selfishness. My heart cracked then, not because of her words, but because of the truth behind them. Our daughter no longer saw sacrifice as love, only as leverage. The final straw came when Peter stood towering like some cheap bully, calling me old man with venom in his voice. That was when I snapped, not with violence, not with rage, but with something sharper, resolve. "Get out," I told them. And for the first time in years, I didn't back down. Now, with that box sitting in my home, the echoes of that night suddenly took on a darker meaning. Samantha's promise that I would regret choosing money over family wasn't just words meant to sting. It was a threat. And here it was, wrapped neatly in cardboard, delivered on the very day meant to honor fathers. The rustling came again, louder this time, followed by a faint hiss that made my blood run cold. Jessica grabbed my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. "Call someone," she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I found myself dialing 911, not for strangers, but for protection from my own child. Tell me, if it were you, would you have opened that box? Or would you have done exactly what I did and stepped back? The dispatcher's voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost too calm for the storm rising in my chest. "Sir, please describe the package." My throat felt dry as dust, but I forced the words out. "Medium-sized box, no return address, holes punched for air. Something inside is moving. It's hissing." Jessica's grip on my arm tightened. I could see her lips moving in silent prayer, though no sound came. The dispatcher urged us to keep our distance to wait for officers who were already on their way. 10 minutes, she said. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime when something alive and dangerous was sitting on my coffee table. I glanced at the mantel above the fireplace. The family photo, the one we'd posed for when Samantha was just 8, was lying face down. Maybe it had fallen during her last tantrum, or maybe someone turned it over deliberately. Either way, that smiling, gap-toothed little girl, staring from behind the glass, no longer existed. She'd grown into someone who could send her parents a venomous creature disguised as a Father's Day gift. My chest ached as I thought of all the sacrifices Jessica and I had made double shifts to buy her that Christmas dollhouse overtime hours for ballet lessons, summer camps, the car at 16. Every memory now twisted into a cruel irony, each act of love paving the road to this betrayal. The rustling inside the box grew louder, more insistent, as if the creature trapped inside was waking up, sensing the tension it had been delivered into. I took a step back, my knees stiff with age and fear. Jessica whispered, "What kind of person does this to their own parents?" I didn't answer. Because I knew. I knew who had the motive, who had access to my credit cards, who had been furious enough to shout that I would regret choosing dignity over surrender. My daughter. Through the front window, I saw the faint blue flash of police lights. Relief flooded me so fast it made my legs wobble. 2 uniformed officers approached with measured steps, eyes sharp and purposeful. When I opened the door, the taller one introduced himself as Officer Reeves. His presence filled the doorway with a calm authority I hadn't felt in days. He listened, nodded, then pulled on latex gloves before approaching the package. Jessica clung to the kitchen doorway, wringing her dish towel, like it could squeeze the fear from her hands. When he leaned close, the hissing sound returned. This time clearer, longer enough that even Reeves muttered, "Snake." My stomach twisted into knots. He called for animal control, explaining in clipped tones that it was likely non-venomous, but that all precautions would be taken. While he spoke into his radio, I realized something. Whoever sent this wanted not just to frighten me, but to humiliate me. To turn Father's Day, a day meant for honor, into a stage for terror. As I stood there, the truth pressed down heavy. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was war inside my own bloodline. What would you have done? Confront your daughter immediately, or hold your tongue until the proof was undeniable? The animal control van pulled into our driveway, just as the tension in my chest threatened to crush me. A stocky man in khaki uniform stepped out carrying a reinforced carrier and a long hook designed for reptiles. Officer Reeves greeted him with a nod. "Mike Johnson, best in the county," he assured us. But reassurance felt thin when the box on my coffee table hissed again, louder, sharper, as if the creature inside was protesting its captivity. Jessica stepped back into the hallway, her face pale. I stayed rooted, unable to look away. Mike knelt in front of the box with the practiced calm of someone who had seen far worse. With careful movements, he slit the packing tape and eased open the flaps. The hissing grew frenzied, a sound that clawed at my nerves like fingernails on glass. Then, with a swift motion, Mike slipped the hook inside and lifted out a coiled, writhing body, orange and brown scales glinting under our living room light. "Corn snake," he announced. "Non-venomous. Beautiful specimen, though. Someone paid good money for this. Beautiful. That was not the word I would have chosen. To me it was horror, incarnate proof of a betrayal so deep it felt like a wound in my chest. Jessica turned her face away, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. My hands clenched until the knuckles whitened. A snake. Sent by my own daughter. On Father's Day. As Mike secured the snake in his carrier, Reeves turned to me with a sharper tone. Do you have any idea who might have sent this, Mr. Carr? Someone angry enough to make a point. His words lingered like an accusation. Jessica looked at me, her eyes searching silently, pleading for me not to speak the name we were both thinking. I swallowed hard. Probably just a prank. Some kids, I muttered. But Reeves wasn't buying it. Kids don't order snakes online, punch breathing holes, and pay for Sunday delivery. This was planned. Someone with motive and resources, and I knew exactly who. The memory slammed into me with merciless clarity: last month's credit card statement, a charge I'd brushed off as trivial. Reptile Palace, $120, $50. I had assumed it was Samantha buying something harmless for the grandchildren. But no. That money had purchased the very creature that hissed in my living room today. My breath caught in my throat. My daughter had used my own account to fund her revenge. I kept my face neutral as Reeves jotted notes in his book, but inside the puzzle pieces locked together with grim finality. The inheritance documents, the accusations, the slammed doors, and now this. It wasn't just anger, it was calculated malice. My daughter had declared war on me, and she had chosen to begin with fear. As the van door closed on the snake, I felt something shift within me. A part of me still clung to the father who had once worked overtime for dollhouses and ballet lessons. But another part, the man standing in his violated home, began to harden. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a target. Tell me, if your own child had crossed that line, would you still call it family, or would you, like me, begin preparing for battle? When the animal control van pulled away, the silence in my house felt heavier than before. The coffee table disinfected, and bare seemed to mock me with its emptiness. Something inside me whispered that the real danger wasn't the snake, it was the daughter who had sent it. Jessica busied herself in the kitchen, clattering dishes louder than necessary, her way of releasing the fear that still clung to her. I sat in my recliner, staring at the restacked inheritance documents, and felt the weight of 43 years pressing on my chest. All those years, I had believed sacrifice equaled love. Now it seemed every sacrifice had simply bought me another demand. My phone buzzed on the side table. A new message, this time from a number not saved but familiar in its tone. Dad, I hope you're happy. The kids need coats and school supplies, but I guess your money is more important. Don't expect to see them anytime soon. The words cut deeper than the hiss of any snake. Emma and Jake, my grandchildren, innocent souls reduced to pawns in their mother's game. Jessica's breath hitched when I showed her the screen. She wouldn't do that to them, she whispered, though her trembling voice betrayed the truth. Samantha had done it before. Weeks without visits whenever I refused her demands. Always dangling the children like bait, forcing compliance with threats wrapped as parental rights. I stood pacing the length of the living room, my steps echoing in the stillness. Something broke inside me then, not like a shatter, but like a lock finally clicking open. I wasn't just angry, I was resolute. No more, I muttered, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Jessica looked at me with wide eyes. In nearly 4 decades of marriage, she'd seen me tired, frustrated, even furious, but never like this. Never with this cold finality. The doorbell rang, suddenly jolting both of us. Jessica froze, clutching the counter. My heart thudded hard as I walked to the entryway. Through the glass panels, I saw headlights pulling away, the faint red glow disappearing down our street. On the doorstep sat another package, smaller this time. No return address. My stomach lurched. Jessica gasped when I brought it inside. "Don't touch it, William, please." Her eyes shone with fresh fear. But as I examined the box, I realized it was lighter, rattling faintly when I tilted it. I slit the tape with trembling hands while Jessica hovered in protest. Inside was no snake, only shredded paper, and a single object, a family photo, slashed diagonally across our faces. I stared at it in disbelief. This wasn't about money anymore. This was psychological warfare. She wanted to break us, to erase us as family entirely. Jessica pressed her hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment I felt the room tilt with the enormity of it all. But then my jaw tightened. She thought she could frighten me into compliance, but she had just revealed her weakness. People only resort to fear when they've lost control. That night, as Jessica cried softly in bed, I sat awake staring at the broken photo. Somewhere inside, a voice whispered, "The snake was only the beginning." So let me ask you, if your own child escalated like this, would you still forgive, or would you prepare for the storm that was clearly coming? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind against the shutters had me on edge, waiting for the next move. Jessica lay beside me, her breaths uneven, caught somewhere between fear and exhaustion. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every sacrifice I'd ever made for Samantha, and how they had led us to this. The dollhouse, the college tuition, the countless checks written in the name of love, all of them pieces of a puzzle that ended with a snake hissing in my living room. By dawn, my decision was clear. I brewed coffee stronger than usual, the bitter steam rising like a warning. Jessica joined me in the kitchen, her hair still mussed from restless sleep. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She already knew. "William," she said softly, "what if she comes back?" Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. She wasn't just afraid anymore, she was angry too. "Then we'll be ready," I answered. At exactly 9 o'clock, a knock shook the door. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor, but the heavy, deliberate pounding of someone determined to be heard. Jessica's face drained of color. I told her to stay back, then opened the door. Samantha stood on the porch, her eyes wild, her hair unkempt, her lips pressed into a furious line. Peter loomed behind her hands, shoved in his pockets, a smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. "Dad," Samantha said, her voice trembling not from sadness, but from rage. "We need to talk." "I think we've talked enough," I replied evenly, keeping my hand firm on the doorframe. "You sent me a snake." Her eyes flickered just for a second. A tiny crack in the armor. "You've lost your mind," she snapped quickly. But before she could say more, Peter let out that laugh, the same smug chuckle I'd heard in the background during our phone call. It wasn't the laugh of surprise. It was the laugh of a man amused by his own cruelty. That sound sealed it for me. "You don't deny it," I said flatly. "Instead, you mock me." Peter stepped forward, his bulk filling the doorway. "Look, old man," he sneered. "Maybe you should stop acting so high and mighty. Samantha has responsibilities, kids, bills. You think you can just shut her out?" I leaned closer, my voice low, steady. "I worked 43 years for what I have. I won't let either of you use me anymore. Not through guilt, not through threats, not through snakes." Samantha's face twisted with fury. "If you do this, you'll regret it. You'll never see Emma and Jake again. They'll grow up believing their grandfather chose money over family." I didn't flinch. For the first time, her threat felt powerless. If that's the lesson you want them to learn, then maybe it's better they aren't here. I won't be blackmailed with their innocence. Her eyes widened in shock, as though she'd just lost her most powerful weapon. Peter muttered something under his breath, but I didn't hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding like war drums. When I finally shut the door, Jessica stood frozen behind me. But in her eyes, for the first time in years, I saw not just fear, but pride. And in that silence, I knew the battle had only begun. "So tell me, if you had been in my shoes, Would you have opened the door at all or slammed it before they could speak another word? The morning after Samantha's visit, I sat alone in my office with a stack of papers that told the story of 3 decades. Bank statements with her name scrawled in the 2-line checks, never repaid credit card bills I had settled to keep collectors from calling her. Each page was a reminder that somewhere along the way, love had been twisted into a ledger of debt. Jessica peeked in her hand, resting on the doorframe. "William," she asked gently, "are you sure you're ready for this?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I traced my finger along a line item from last month, Reptile Palace, 127,915. Proof hidden in plain sight that my own daughter had used my money to buy the snake that arrived on Father's Day. I closed the folder with a snap. I've been ready for 30 years. I just didn't want to admit it. Jessica stepped closer, laying a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was soft, but it didn't weaken my resolve, it strengthened it. For too long, I had mistaken enabling for compassion. That ended today. Logging into the bank felt like walking into a battlefield. The screen glowed passwords unlocked, and Samantha's name appeared under authorized users. I remembered giving her that privilege in college for emergencies. A father's safety net, I had called it. But what had started as emergencies became her lifestyle. My cursor hovered over the option Remove Authorized User. I thought about Emma and Jake, about how their mother used them like poker chips in her cruel game. Then I clicked Confirm. It felt like cutting a cord that had tethered me to years of manipulation. Next came the automatic transfers, the quiet, invisible lifelines that had kept her rent, paid her car, insured her indulgences, funded. One by one, I canceled them. Each click was like lifting a stone off my chest. By the time I was finished, her financial safety net had vanished. I leaned back in my chair, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt control return to my hands. Jessica, standing silently by the doorway, finally asked, "Do you think she'll call?" I gave a humorless laugh. "Oh, she'll call. Not out of love, not out of concern, out of panic. And when she does, she'll learn that this bank is closed." The irony struck me then. For years, I had told myself I was teaching Samantha responsibility by rescuing her, but I had only been teaching her that consequences didn't exist. Now, for the first time in her adult life, she would face reality without me cushioning the blow. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. Across the street, the Henderson kids were riding their bikes, their laughter carrying through the quiet suburban air. Normal families, children who saw their parents as guides, not wallets. I envied that simplicity. But envy quickly gave way to determination. Samantha thought the snake would terrify me into submission. Instead, it had unlocked the part of me that remembered what being a father really meant, not giving in to threats, but setting boundaries even when it hurts. So let me ask you, if your child forced you into this corner, would you have done the same? Or would you still be paying their bills, hoping one day they'd finally change? The call came earlier than I expected. The clock on the kitchen wall read 8:15 when Samantha's name flashed across the caller ID, vibrating against the wood of the table like an alarm. Jessica hovered near the sink, clutching her coffee mug so tightly I thought it might crack. I let it ring twice before I answered, giving myself a moment to steady my voice. "Good morning, Samantha," I said evenly. Her voice barreled through the receiver, sharp and frantic. "Dad, what have you done? My card's not working." I tried to buy groceries, and it was declined. The car insurance bounced. What the hell is happening? I sipped my coffee, letting the silence hang for a beat. "Samantha," I said calmly, "I know you sent me that Father's Day gift." The pause on the other end was telling. Not shock, not confusion. Just a heartbeat of silence before she lashed back. You've lost your mind. How could you set me up like this? Set her up. Not what gift, not even a denial, just immediate deflection. My chest tightened with grim confirmation. I didn't set you up. I replied, my voice as steady as stone. I simply stopped paying for your irresponsibility. Her pitch climbed higher, dripping with hysteria. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills, obligations, responsibilities. I cut in sharply. Responsibilities, Samantha, are exactly what you've been running from for years. I let my words sink in. Your rent, your car payment, your so-called emergencies, they've all come out of my account. And what have you given in return? Lies, manipulation, and a snake in a box. Jessica's breath caught at the mention of the snake. Her eyes fixed on me as though she couldn't believe I'd said it aloud. Samantha didn't flinch. She didn't deny it. Instead, her tone shifted, sliding into the pitiful register I knew too well. Dad, please. You don't understand. Peter and I are struggling. We're drowning. You're supposed to help me. You're my father. I almost laughed at the audacity. And I did help you. For 30 years. Every time you fell, I caught you. Every debt you created, I paid. But today is the day that ends. Her desperation turned venomous in an instant. Fine, you want to play games? Don't expect to see Emma and Jake ever again? They'll grow up thinking their grandfather abandoned them. I leaned back in my chair, my voice dropping low, firm. Those threats stopped working yesterday. If you want to keep them from me, that's on your conscience, not mine. Silence. For the first time, I sensed her recalibrating, realizing her usual weapons were useless. I pictured her pacing her apartment, Peter snickering beside her, both stunned by a resistance they hadn't expected. You'll regret this, she hissed finally, her voice brittle with rage. This isn't over. I ended the call, setting the phone down gently. My hand didn't shake. Jessica stood frozen, staring at me with wide eyes. William, she whispered, you sounded like a different man. I met her gaze and answered simply, no, Jess. For the first time in years, I sounded like myself. So I ask you, if your own child threatened to use your grandchildren as leverage, would you break, or would you finally stand your ground? The house was quiet after I hung up, but inside me something had shifted. It wasn't peace exactly, more like a steel rod planted firmly down my spine. I had survived the first storm, and I knew another was already gathering. Jessica sat across from me, her coffee-forgotten eyes locked on mine. She's coming here, she said softly. I nodded. Yes, and she won't be alone. By late morning, I heard the roar of an engine tearing into our driveway. Tires screeched, doors slammed. Jessica gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles pale. I stood slowly, steadying my breath. The pounding at the front door came hard and fast, each knock a challenge. When I opened it, there they were, Samantha, flushed with fury, and Peter looming like an enforcer, his smirk replaced with something darker. Dad, we need to talk, Samantha snapped. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from rage, tightly coiled. We already did, I said calmly, not moving from the doorway. I was clear. You were insane, she spat. You cut me off because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about a stupid package. There's no misunderstanding, I answered. You sent me a snake. I responded appropriately. Her mouth opened, ready to deny, but Peter stepped forward, cutting her off. Look, old man, you think you're clever, but you don't get to just pull the plug like that. Samantha has responsibilities, kids to feed, rent to pay. You can't just shut her out. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping low. I raised my daughter. I didn't raise you. You've leeched off her and me for years. That ends today. Samantha's eyes glistened not with tears of sorrow, but with desperation. Fine. You want to do this, you'll never see Emma and Jake again. They'll grow up thinking their grandfather chose money over family. For a long time, those words would have gutted me. But now they landed with nothing but a dull thud. If that's the lesson you want them to learn, Samantha, I said quietly, then maybe it's better they aren't here to see you use them as bargaining chips. The shock on her face was like a crack of lightning. She wasn't expecting resistance. She was expecting collapse. Peter's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he stepped closer until I could smell the acrid scent of his cologne. "We know where you live, old man," he muttered. His voice was low, dangerous. "We know your routines. You might want to reconsider before things get messy." Jessica gasped behind me, but I didn't flinch. My voice was calm, deliberate. "Are you threatening me, Peter?" he sneered. "Just saying family relationships go both ways." "Actually," I replied, "when you cross into threats, it stops being family business. It becomes police business." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Samantha grabbed Peter's arm, dragging him back toward the car. "This isn't over," she hissed. I watched them go their car, tearing down the street, but I didn't slam the door in defeat. I closed it with quiet finality. Jessica's face was pale, but her eyes shimmered with something I hadn't seen in years: pride. And in that moment I realized the greatest gift I could give my grandchildren wasn't money. It was the example of a man who finally chose dignity over fear. So tell me, if your child showed up at your doorstep with threats in their mouth, would you bow your head or hold your ground? That night, the house felt like a war zone after the soldiers had gone home. The air was thick with silence, broken only by Jessica's footsteps as she moved aimlessly from room to room, picking up items that didn't need picking up, wiping surfaces that were already clean. It was her way of managing fear motion instead of stillness. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain, remembering Samantha's face on the porch. There had been a time when her anger frightened me because it was mixed with love. But what I saw today wasn't love. It was calculation, cruelty, and entitlement. Jessica finally sat down across from me, her eyes searching mine. "William," she whispered. "What if she really tries something worse?" I reached for her hand, feeling the tremble beneath her skin. "Then we'll be ready. But we can't keep living like this, Jess. We've been letting her hold us hostage for too long." Her eyes filled with tears. "I keep thinking about when she was little. Remember that Mother's Day breakfast? She made burnt toast, orange juice with pulp. She was so proud." Jessica's voice cracked. How did that child become this? The memory pierced me too. The pink pajamas, the messy hair, the stick figure drawings she used to tape to the fridge. I swallowed hard, forcing down the grief. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we can't keep clinging to who she was while ignoring who she is." The phone buzzed again, vibrating across the table. Another text from Samantha. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I stared at the words, my jaw tightening. "See," I said, showing Jessica. "She won't stop until we make her stop." Jessica exhaled slowly. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, the decision forming in words before I could stop them. Legal protection, restraining orders, and I'm changing the will. If Samantha wants to threaten us, she won't do it with the promise of our money dangling in her future. Jessica's eyes widened. "You'd cut her out completely." "Yes," I said firmly, "but Emma and Jake will still be cared for. I'll set up a trust that goes directly to their education, managed by someone she can't manipulate. That way our love for them remains, but Samantha can't touch a dime." For a long moment, Jessica just stared at me, her face a mixture of sorrow and relief. "It feels so final," she whispered. It is final, I said. Because what she did today wasn't just reckless. It was deliberate. She sent a snake into our home. She turned our grandchildren into bargaining chips. If we don't set boundaries now, she'll destroy us both. Jessica's tears finally spilled, but when she reached across the table, her grip was strong. Then let's do it, she said. Let's protect ourselves. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me like armor. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to Samantha's chaos, I was preparing to end it. So I'll ask you, if your own child crossed this line, would you cling to the memory of who they once were, or face the reality of who they've become? The next morning, I found myself standing in the granite lobby of a downtown office building, a manila folder tucked under my arm. The polished floors reflected a version of me I barely recognized, an aging father who had finally decided to stop being his daughter's safety net. Jessica walked beside me, quiet but resolute, her hand brushing mine every few steps, like she was reminding me we were in this together. When we reached the third floor, the gold letters on the frosted glass door read, "Margaret Summers, Attorney at Law." Margaret had handled our wills and property transfers for over a decade. She had always known us as the steady couple, responsible, prepared, never in crisis. When she greeted us that morning, her sharp eyes immediately noticed the tension in our faces. "William, Jessica," she said warmly, "what brings you in so suddenly?" I placed the folder on her desk, the papers inside rattling slightly from my trembling hands. "It's our daughter," I began, and the words tumbled out in a rush. The inheritance argument, the shattered coffee cup, the snake in the box, the threats on our doorstep. Margaret listened without interrupting, though I saw her expression grow tighter with every detail. "This goes beyond family disagreements," she said finally, her tone firm. "What you're describing is harassment, intimidation, and it's escalating." Her words landed like a gavel striking wood. For years I had framed Samantha's behavior as missteps, as crises we could smooth over. But hearing a professional call it by its real name gave me both clarity and sorrow. "I want to restructure the will," I told her. "Everything that was meant for Samantha will instead go to an educational trust for Emma and Jake. I won't punish them for their mother's choices, but I won't let her touch a cent." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's wise. We'll appoint an independent trustee to ensure funds are only released for legitimate educational needs. Your daughter will have no access." Jessica squeezed my hand, her eyes wet but steady. "What about us?" she asked softly. "Your home and retirement accounts remain untouched," Margaret assured her. "But I also recommend we file for a restraining order. Her actions with that package demonstrate planning and malice. The court will take this seriously." I exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. A restraining order. Cutting Samantha out of the will. It felt final, almost brutal, but it also felt necessary. For decades, I had tried to protect my daughter from consequences. Now I was protecting my wife, my peace, and myself. Margaret slid documents across the desk. "Sign here and we'll begin the process immediately. The will changes can be finalized within a week. The restraining order can be filed today." As the pen scratched across the paper, I felt something uncoil in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing a check to cover Samantha's mistakes. I was signing my name to protect Jessica and me from further harm. When we stepped back into the sunlight of the city street, Jessica slipped her hand into mine. "Do you think this will stop her?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. "But it will mean her next move won't be against us. It'll be against the law. So let me ask you, if it were your child, would you still hope for change? Or would you finally sign the papers that close the door for good?" 2 days after signing the documents, The house felt different, not quieter exactly, but sturdier. Like the walls themselves understood we had finally taken steps to protect ourselves. Jessica and I returned to routines we hadn't enjoyed in years. Morning coffee without dread, afternoon walks, without checking for messages, dinners without the shadow of Samantha's next crisis. For the first time in decades, I felt like life belonged to us again. But peace, I've learned, is often just the space before the next storm. The first sign came in the form of a phone call, not from Samantha, but from a mutual acquaintance. "William," the voice said hesitantly, "I thought you should know your daughter's been saying some things." My stomach sank. Apparently, Samantha and Peter had started spreading rumors around town, painting me as a miserly old man who hoarded money while his daughter and grandchildren starved. She claimed I'd cut her off without warning that Jessica and I were living comfortably while she begged for help. It was a calculated smear campaign, and it was working. That afternoon, when I went to pick up groceries, I caught the sideways glances. The cashier, who had known me for years, hesitated before saying hello. A neighbor I'd often chatted with at the produce aisle turned away when our eyes met. I felt the sting of whispered judgment. My own daughter had poisoned the well of community, turning respect I had earned over decades into suspicion overnight. Back home, Jessica listened silently as I relayed what I'd heard. Her face paled, her lips tightening into a thin line. "She's trying to destroy your reputation," she whispered. I nodded grimly. Not just mine, ours. The snake had been the first act of terror. This was the second character assassination, a weapon no less venomous. That evening, as we sat on the porch, headlights swept across the driveway. Samantha's BMW pulled in, and my chest tightened. She climbed out, Peter trailing behind, both wearing expressions that mixed arrogance with determination. "Dad," she called, striding toward us. "We need to talk." I didn't rise from my chair. "We've already talked," I said evenly. Her voice rose, carrying across the quiet street. "Do you realize what you've done to us? We're drowning, and you've left us to sink. People are starting to notice, and when they hear what you've done, they'll know the truth. You're not a generous father, you're a greedy old man." Jessica flinched at the venom in her words. Peter added fuel, his tone mocking. "You worked your whole life for what, to die with money in the bank, and no family at your funeral." Their voices carried deliberately loud enough for neighbors to hear. It wasn't just a confrontation. It was public humiliation staged in my own front yard. I clenched the arms of my chair but didn't stand. This was the counterattack, the second escalation I had been expecting. I looked straight at them and said quietly, "If lies are the only tools you have left, then spread them. But understand this: truth has a way of finding daylight." Inside, my heart pounded like a war drum. This battle was far from over. "So I ask you, if your child tried to destroy your reputation in public, would you shout back, or would you sit in silence knowing the truth was your sharpest weapon?" The morning after their public outburst, the phone began ringing before sunrise. Old friends, church members, even a distant cousin I hadn't heard from in years, they all called with the same careful tone, asking if everything was all right, if Jessica and I truly were cutting Samantha and the children off without reason. Some didn't ask outright. They just let the silence hang long enough for me to hear the doubt in their voices. My daughter's lies had traveled fast, weaving themselves into gossip like wildfire through dry grass. Jessica sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. "She's turning everyone against us," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "After everything we've done for her." Her grief was sharper than anger, the grief of a mother watching the bond with her child twist into something unrecognizable. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Let her spread her poison. We'll answer with truth. But truth alone rarely wins when shouted against lies. That afternoon, as I opened the mailbox, I found a letter that made my blood run cold. It was from our homeowners association citing disturbances at our address, suggesting that domestic disputes had caused concern among neighbors. At the bottom, scrawled in ink, someone had written anonymously, "Take care of your daughter before she ruins this community too." I carried the letter inside my hands, shaking. Jessica read it, then pressed it to her chest like she could shield herself from the words. "She's not just attacking us privately anymore," she said. "She wants to make us pariahs." That evening, I sat in my office surrounded by the same financial papers I had used to cut her off. Only now they weren't evidence of generosity, they were evidence of a pattern. Every transfer, every bailout, every month of rent I had covered. Proof that Samantha's story of abandonment was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. I began building a file, a record, not just for myself, but for what was coming next. If Samantha wanted to drag my name through the mud, then I would meet her with facts. Bank statements, credit card charges, even the Reptile Palace receipt, cold, hard proof that she had funded her little prank with my money. Jessica appeared in the doorway, watching me slide papers into the folder. "William," she said softly. "What are you doing?" "Preparing," I answered. "She's crossed into public defamation. I won't strike first, but when the time comes, I'll be ready." She nodded slowly, tears clinging to her lashes. "It feels like we're losing her forever." I set the folder down, walked to her, and took her hands. "Jess, we lost the daughter we knew a long time ago. What we're fighting now is someone else entirely." Outside, the evening air carried the sound of children riding bicycles, laughter echoing down the block. A bitter irony, neighbors whispering about my failures while their own families looked untouched, unbroken. I watched them through the window and felt something cold but steady rise within me. Samantha wanted war. I was done pretending it was just family drama. So let me ask you, if someone you loved started destroying your reputation to save their own, would you fight back openly or wait in silence with your evidence ready? 2 nights later, I was jolted awake by the beam of headlights sweeping across our bedroom wall. Jessica stirred beside me, murmuring in half-sleep, but I slipped out of bed and peered through the blinds. A car idled at the curb, Samantha's BMW. I watched its silhouette, the faint glow of a cigarette ember, flaring and fading. Peter. They weren't here to visit. They were here to intimidate. For nearly 20 minutes, the car sat there, engine humming like a predator's growl in the dark. Finally, the tires screeched, and the car sped off, leaving behind the heavy scent of burned rubber. I returned to bed, though sleep never came. My mind kept circling the same truth: my daughter and her husband weren't just angry, they were escalating. The next morning, Jessica found me already dressed, sipping bitter black coffee at the table. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. I shook my head. "They were outside last night." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Here at the house," I nodded. "They want us to know they can reach us whenever they choose." Jessica sank into a chair, fear shadowing her features. "William, this isn't just family conflict anymore. This is harassment. It's dangerous." Her words struck me harder than she realized. For years I had been the buffer, the one telling her not to worry, that we'd figure it out. But now she was the one sounding the alarm, and I couldn't dismiss it. Not when she had stood beside me through decades of sacrifice, through nights. I worked double shifts to pay for Samantha's tuition, through years of silence. While I carried the financial burden alone. If Jessica was frightened, it was because she had every reason to be. I walked into my office and pulled open the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside sat an old cedar box filled with keepsakes, report cards, birthday cards, stick figure drawings Samantha made when she was small. I pulled one out, a crayon picture of her standing on my shoulders at the county fair, both of us grinning ear to ear. For a moment, my resolve wavered. How had the child who drew this grown into the woman who sent me a snake and sat outside my house in the middle of the night? Jessica appeared behind me, her voice soft. "You still hope, don't you?" I set the drawing back in the box and closed the lid firmly. Hope is what kept me writing checks long after I should have stopped. Hope is what let her use our grandchildren as weapons. No more Jess. Hope is a luxury we can't afford. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded slowly, understanding the weight of my words. That evening, I called Margaret, our lawyer. I told her about the car idling outside, about the rumors spreading, about the threats that now hung in the air like smoke. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Document everything, William. Time, dates, details. This will help us strengthen the restraining order when the time comes." When I hung up, Jessica asked, "Do you think this will stop her?" I sighed, staring out at the quiet street. "No," I admitted, "but the law will catch up to her if she keeps pushing." And deep down, I knew she would. Samantha had always pushed, until someone finally pushed back. So I ask you, if you saw your own child sitting in a car outside your home at night, would you open the door in forgiveness? Or begin preparing for the legal war that was surely coming? The following day, the weight of exhaustion settled into my bones. Even coffee couldn't mask the heaviness in my chest. Jessica moved about the kitchen, quiet but purposeful, like she had already made peace with the decision I was only now arriving at. When she finally sat across from me, her eyes were steady despite the fatigue. "William," she said softly, "we can't live like this anymore. Not waiting for the next knock, the next rumor, the next box on our porch." Her words echoed the truth I had been circling for weeks. For years, I told myself I was protecting Samantha by shielding her from consequences. But shielding had become enabling, and enabling had turned her into someone I barely recognized. I thought of the snake, the slashed photograph, the car idling outside our home. My daughter wasn't just angry, she was dangerous. That afternoon, we drove back to Margaret's office. The elevator ride was silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Margaret greeted us with her usual calm authority, but her expression darkened as she listened to the latest events. When I described the car parked outside Peter's cigarette glowing in the dark, her pen froze mid-sentence. "That's not just intimidation," she said. "That's stalking." Jessica's hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. "What can we do?" Margaret leaned forward. "You've already taken the first steps, cutting her off, financially restructuring the will. Now we need to make the restraining order airtight. With documentation of harassment, stalking, and threats, the court will take this very seriously." She opened a new file and began recording every detail, dates, times, witnesses. When she asked if we had proof of financial manipulation, I slid the folder across her desk: bank statements, credit card bills, even the Reptile Palace receipt. She leafed through the papers, her eyebrows arching. "This is exactly what we need. Not just to protect you, but to establish a pattern if she tries to challenge the trust fund for your grandchildren later." Jessica glanced at me, her eyes glistening. "The grandchildren," she whispered. "They'll be safe," yes, Margaret assured her. "The educational trust ensures Emma and Jake will have resources for school, for their future. Samantha and Peter will have no control." I exhaled a sound that felt like the release of years of pent-up weight. Margaret handed me another set of documents. "I also recommend we prepare for escalation. People like your daughter don't stop when you set boundaries, they push harder. But if she violates the order, it becomes a criminal matter. The police will handle it, not you." Jessica's grip tightened on my arm, and for the first time in weeks, I saw relief flicker in her eyes. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were taking back control. As I signed the papers, I thought about Samantha's words on the porch. "You'll regret this." Maybe she was right. Maybe I would regret the years wasted trying to save someone determined to drown. But I would never regret protecting my wife, my home, and the future of 2 innocent grandchildren. So let me ask you, if your own child's choices forced you into court, would you hesitate out of love, or would you finally draw a line with the law? The papers were filed by late afternoon, and Margaret promised us copies would be delivered once the judge signed them. As Jessica and I walked out of her office into the crisp air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Yet beneath that relief lay an undercurrent of unease. People like Samantha and Peter didn't simply accept defeat. They looked for new angles, new weapons. Sure enough, by the next morning, the storm arrived. When I stepped outside to retrieve the paper, I found our mailbox stuffed with flyers. Bold black letters screamed accusations: "Greedy father abandons his daughter and grandchildren." Beneath the headline was a photo of me taken at some neighborhood event years ago, smiling with Jessica at my side. My stomach twisted as I skimmed the words, "While his grandchildren go without, William Carr hoards his wealth, hiding behind lawyers instead of being a man." Jessica gasped when she saw me carrying the stack inside. She flipped through one, her face blanching. "She printed these." She actually handed these out. I nodded grimly. Peter's handiwork, no doubt. He's always been more interested in theatrics than truth. We sat at the kitchen table, the flyers spread out like evidence of a crime scene. I could almost hear Samantha's voice behind the words, her desperation bleeding through every accusation. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was desperate to turn the world against me. I picked up one of the sheets and studied it carefully. "This proves we're doing the right thing," I said at last. Jessica looked at me in disbelief. "Right, William, she's destroying your name." "She's destroying herself," I corrected. "Anyone who knows me, who truly knows us, will see through this. And when the restraining order is served, these papers will become evidence too. Every lie she spreads will only tighten the rope she's already wrapped around her neck." Jessica's eyes softened, though worry still lingered. "But what if the neighbors believe her?" I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "Then they weren't our neighbors to begin with. Let them talk. Let her scream. Truth has patience, Jess. Lies don't." That evening, as the sun set over Maple Street, I watched children riding their bikes past our house. A few parents glanced at me, their expressions wary, no doubt influenced by Samantha's propaganda. It stung, I won't deny it. But instead of rage, I felt a kind of cold clarity. For the first time, I saw my daughter's tactics not as personal betrayals, but as the frantic thrashing of someone who knew her grip on us was slipping. I turned to Jessica, who stood at the window beside me. "This is her counterattack," I said quietly. "The smear campaign, the threats, the late-night intimidation. But it won't last." She looked at me, her face tired but resolute. "And what comes next?" I let the silence stretch before answering. "The final blow. Not mine, but the law's. When the restraining order is served and the will is changed, Samantha will realize she's lost everything she thought she controlled." For the first time, I believed it fully, not as hope, but as certainty. "So tell me, if your child tried to shame you in front of the world, would you lash out in anger, or would you let their lies collapse under their own weight?" The day the court order was delivered began like any other. Jessica and I sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming between us, the newspaper spread open. But the silence carried a different weight: anticipation. Margaret had called the night before to confirm that the judge had signed everything: the will changes the trust fund for Emma and Jake, and most importantly, the restraining order. Today, officers would serve Samantha and Peter. Today, the line we'd drawn would no longer be invisible. It would be backed by the law. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Margaret phoned again. "It's done," she said simply. "The papers have been delivered. From this point on, if they set foot on your property or contact you directly, it's a criminal offense." Her voice carried calm authority, but the words still landed heavy in my chest. For decades, I had been my daughter's shield, her excuse, her safety net. Now I had placed that responsibility in the hands of the court. Jessica exhaled a long, trembling breath when I told her. She sat down heavily, her eyes shimmering. "So that's it. She's really cut out, not the grandchildren," I reminded her gently. "They'll still be provided for. But Samantha, yes. She has no access to our money, no power to use us as pawns." The words should have comforted me, but instead a wave of grief washed through. I thought of Samantha as a little girl, her hand in mine at the county fair, her eyes lighting up when I bought her the dollhouse she'd begged for. I thought of her standing at her wedding, promising a future that seemed so bright then. Now those memories felt like someone else's life. Later that evening, as Jessica prepared tea, I sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. Across the way, the Hendersons laughed as they grilled dinner in their backyard. Mrs. Patterson watered her roses, humming softly. Life went on untouched, while ours had been turned inside out. For the first time, though, I didn't envy them. I pitied Samantha instead. Because no matter how many lies she spread, no matter how loud she shouted, she couldn't change the reality. The law had stripped her of the leverage she thought she owned. The phone buzzed once, twice, her name flashing across the screen. Jessica's eyes darted to mine, fear flickering in them. I let it ring. A minute later, a voicemail icon appeared. I didn't listen. Not yet. The restraining order meant every message from this point forward was evidence, not conversation. As the night deepened, I carried our empty cups to the sink. Jessica touched my arm. "Do you think she'll stop?" I paused, staring at the quiet glow of the street lamp outside. "No, not right away. But now her anger belongs to the courts, not to us." It was a strange relief. Like laying down a burden I hadn't realized had bent my back for years. "So tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you mourn the daughter you lost? Or would you breathe easier, knowing the law had finally taken your place as the shield?" The restraining order was barely a day old when the first test came. Jessica and I were eating dinner roast chicken, her favorite, when headlights swept across the front of the house. Tires crunched on the gravel driveway, followed by the slam of two doors. My fork froze mid-air. Jessica's face drained of color. We both knew who it was before I even stood up. I opened the blinds just a fraction. Samantha's BMW sat in the drive, Peter leaning against the hood with his arms crossed, his expression dripping with contempt. Samantha stood beside him, her phone raised like a weapon. She was recording, no doubt hoping to provoke a reaction she could twist into evidence against us. Jessica's hand clutched my arm. "William, the order, I know," I said calmly, though my pulse hammered. "Stay inside." When I opened the door, the evening air carried their voices before I even stepped onto the porch. "See this," Samantha shouted to her phone camera. "My father thinks he can abandon his family and hide behind lawyers. He's forgotten what it means to be a parent." Peter chimed in, sneering. "Old man, you think a piece of paper will keep us away? Family doesn't abandon family." I stood on the porch, hands steady at my sides. "You're violating a court order," I said, my voice measured, deliberate. "Leave now before I call the police." Samantha laughed, the sound sharp as glass. "You wouldn't dare. You've always been too weak to stand up to me." For years, she'd been right, but not tonight. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialing with slow precision so she could see. "Dispatch," I said into the receiver, "this is William Carr. My daughter and her husband are trespassing in violation of a restraining order." Peter muttered a curse, his smirk faltering. Samantha's eyes widened. "Dad, are you serious? You'd call the police on your own daughter?" The words stung, but I didn't waver. "You made that choice when you sent me a snake in a box." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the distant hum of crickets. Jessica had come to stand just behind me, her presence a quiet strength. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night, growing louder by the second. Samantha lowered her phone, her bravado slipping. Peter grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the car. "Come on," he hissed. They peeled out of the driveway just as the patrol car arrived. Officer Reeves stepped out, his flashlight sweeping the yard. "Mr. Carr," he asked. "They were here," I confirmed. "Samantha and Peter." I told them to leave, and when they refused, I called. He nodded, jotting notes in his pad. "You did the right thing. Every incident builds your case stronger. Next time, if they don't leave, we'll take them in." As he drove off, Jessica turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of pride. For once, I hadn't folded. "So I ask you, if your child stood on your porch defying the law, would you hesitate to call for help? Or would you finally let accountability replace blood ties?" The night after the police visit, the house seemed to exhale. Jessica and I sat in the living room, the lamplight soft against the walls, a quiet that once felt hollow, now pulsing with strength. Yet beneath that calm, I knew another strike was coming. People like Samantha and Peter didn't retreat, they regrouped. By morning, the whispers had already reached me. A neighbor, well-meaning but awkward, stopped me on my walk. "William," he said hesitantly, "I heard Samantha's been saying you cut her off without warning, that you've left her and the kids destitute." His eyes flickered with sympathy, but also doubt. I forced a small smile. "You heard one side of the story. There's more to it." Back home, Jessica's face darkened as I told her. "She's turning the neighborhood into a jury," she said bitterly. "And we're the villains in her story." I sat at my desk, opening the folder I'd started weeks earlier. The evidence lay neatly in rows, bank transfers labeled emergency assistance checks, written for debts never repaid, the receipt for the snake. I slid the flyers she'd spread into the stack. Lies piled atop lies, and now they were evidence. That afternoon, Margaret called to check in. I explained what had happened, the police visit, the neighborhood gossip. "Good," she said briskly, when I mentioned calling 911. "You're building a record. Every incident strengthens the order, makes enforcement easier." Her tone softened. "William, you've carried this burden for too long. It's time the system carried it for you." Her words steadied me. That evening, Jessica and I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. The neighborhood seemed quieter, as if waiting for the next move. Jessica took my hand, her grip firm despite the tremor. "Do you think she hates us now?" she asked softly. I looked out at the street, the lamplight flickering on. "No," I said slowly. "I think she hates what she can't control." Just as the words left my mouth, a car slowed near the curb. My stomach tightened, but it wasn't Samantha's BMW, it was Officer Reeves stopping to check in. He stepped out, his presence calm but authoritative. "Just making sure everything's quiet tonight," he said with a nod. Jessica exhaled, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered. Reeves looked me square in the eye. "You did the right thing. Don't let guilt cloud your judgment. Parents protect their children. But children who cross certain lines must face consequences. That's not cruelty, Mr. Carr, that's justice." His words struck deep, anchoring me in a truth I'd resisted. For years, I'd equated fatherhood with sacrifice. But sometimes fatherhood meant drawing boundaries so sharp they cut. After he left, Jessica and I lingered on the porch. The air was cool, scented faintly with honeysuckle. For the first time, I didn't feel hunted. I felt fortified. So let me ask you, if your child twisted the world against you, would you fight to defend your name, or would you stay silent, trusting the truth to outlast the lies? 2 mornings later, Margaret called again. Her voice carried that steady confidence I had come to rely on. "William, I wanted to let you know the trust fund is finalized. Emma and Jake are secured. Not a penny can be touched by Samantha or Peter." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared out the window at the quiet street, the neighbors' children chalking patterns on the sidewalk, their laughter ringing in the air. My grandchildren would have that chance too, not because of their mother, but in spite of her. Jessica's eyes filled when I relayed the news. She pressed a hand to her lips. "So it's done," she whispered. "They can't use the children against us anymore." I nodded. Not financially, not legally. The law has shut that door. Later that day, an envelope arrived by courier. Inside were the official court papers, the restraining order signed, stamped, and sealed. Jessica traced the raised seal with her fingertips, as if testing its reality. "After all these years," she murmured, "we finally have protection." We sat together at the kitchen table, the documents spread before us like a shield. My hands rested on the wood, steady for the first time in decades. "Jess," I said quietly, "we've been living under Samantha's shadow for too long. Every crisis, every plea, every threat, we bent to them. Now it's over." She nodded, though her eyes were wet. "I keep remembering her when she was 8, she whispered. The burnt toast, the orange juice with pulp. How proud she was. And now—" Her voice trailed off, grief wrapping around her words. I reached for her hand. We loved her then, and we love her still. But love doesn't mean surrender. Love doesn't mean letting her destroy us. That evening, as twilight deepened, we sat on the porch. I watched the familiar rhythms of the neighborhood, the Hendersons grilling Mrs. Patterson, watering her roses, the world moving on. For years I had compared myself to them, envied their peace. But now I realized something: peace wasn't given. It was claimed. And today I had claimed it. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Samantha. I didn't listen. I slipped the device into my pocket, its weight insignificant compared to the papers in front of me. The restraining order meant I didn't have to answer. The trust fund meant the grandchildren were safe, and the will meant Samantha's entitlement was severed for good. Jessica leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you think she'll ever forgive us?" she asked softly. I closed my eyes, letting the night sounds wash over me. Maybe one day. But forgiveness isn't what we need right now. What we need is freedom. And for the first time in decades, I felt it real, solid, undeniable. So I'll ask you, if your child forced you to choose between family and freedom, would you cling to the pain of the past or step boldly into the peace of the future? The quiet that followed was unlike any I had ever known. For years, every silence in our home had been heavy with waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring, for Samantha's next demand, for the inevitable storm of guilt and threats. But now the silence carried a different weight. It wasn't fear. It was release. 2 days after the restraining order was served, Margaret called once more. William, the sheriff's department, confirmed delivery. From this point forward, any contact from Samantha or Peter becomes a criminal matter. You don't need to engage. Just call us and we'll handle it. Her words felt like the final lock clicking into place on a door that had stood open too long. I thanked her, hung up, and sat quietly for several minutes, letting it sink in. Jessica found me at the kitchen table, the afternoon light streaming across the papers that marked the end of 3 decades of enabling. She set a cup of tea in front of me and sat down. "It's really over, isn't it?" she asked softly. I nodded. Yes. At least the part where she holds power over us. That's finished. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but her expression was one of relief rather than sorrow. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd stand this firm," she whispered. "I'm proud of you, William." That night, as we prepared for bed, I found myself drawn once more to the cedar box in my office, the one filled with Samantha's childhood mementos. I lifted the lid and pulled out a drawing of our family stick figures, holding hands under a bright crayon sun. For a long time I stared at it, my throat tight. Somewhere in the middle of the battles, the threats, the manipulations, I had lost sight of that little girl. She still lived in my memory, but the woman she became had buried her beneath lies and cruelty. I placed the drawing back carefully, almost like laying a flower on a grave. Some part of me mourned, but another part stronger now understood that mourning didn't mean surrender. I could grieve the daughter I lost while refusing to be destroyed by the woman she had become. The following morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee. The sun was warm, the air filled with the sound of children laughing as they rode their bikes down the street. Jessica joined me, her hand slipping into mine. We didn't need words. We both knew this peace had been bought at a high cost, but it was worth every step. When my phone buzzed again, flashing Samantha's name, I didn't flinch. I let it go to voicemail and then deleted it without listening. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Looking out at the street, I realized something. The snake in that box wasn't just her message of terror. It was the turning point, the catalyst, that forced me to break the chains I had carried for too long. So I ask you, if betrayal forced you to choose, would you cling to the toxic bond of blood, or would you embrace the peace that comes with letting go? Looking back now, I see the snake wasn't just a creature in a box, it was a symbol of how far things had gone, how love had been twisted into control, and how my silence had allowed it to grow. I spent decades believing that sacrifice meant protection, that writing another check meant being a good father, but what it really meant was teaching my daughter that love could be manipulated, that responsibility was optional, and that family ties excused cruelty. Cutting her off was not easy. Restructuring the will, filing a restraining order, those choices felt like chiseling away at my own heart. But they were necessary. Because real love doesn't enable destruction. Real love draws boundaries. It says enough. And sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give isn't money. It's teaching their children that actions have consequences. If you're listening to this, maybe you've faced something similar. Maybe you've been caught between love and self-preservation, between family and freedom. My story is proof you don't have to surrender your dignity to keep the peace. So I ask you, have you ever had to draw that kind of line with your own family? How did it change you? Share your experience in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this lesson resonates, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, this love without boundaries isn't love, it's captivity. Thank you for listening.